evidence to date around summer jobs and its ability to target youth finance in terms of reduction. And lots of prominent work has happened here. I'm Caleb Jackson, Head of Change for Youth Sector, and this is our fourth and final virtual learning cafe for this financial year. So don't be upset if you're thinking final is final. No, it's just this year, and I'm sure we'll do more come April forwards. And for many of you who are returning, welcome back. For many new faces, welcome to Youth Endowment Fund. We are a Make It Work centre, and we exist to prevent children and young people from becoming involved in violence, whilst at the same time building a movement to put the knowledge of what works into practice. So this is hugely exciting. My own background is 20 years plus of working with young people, vulnerable young people across England, and really pleased to be able to bring to you this Summer Jobs Exemplar webinar. Lots of fantastic speakers from practice leaders, national leaders, United States leaders in this very field and research of reducing youth violence. And we're really pleased to have colleagues from across the States and colleagues across across England mainly, but working across England and Wales here with us in that regard. So enough of me, and we're going to get kicking. A huge welcome. Please, as always, we're going to hear from our colleagues over at United States first, and then there'll be time for the Q&A. In the Q&A for the US colleagues, just drop us a line, and then on the reverse of that, we'll hear from our UK colleagues, and then there'll be a Q&A for them too. So just think it this way. The first segment will be US colleagues, US questions, and the second segment will be UK colleagues, UK questions. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Julia. Julia has come to us from New York and is the Assistant Commissioner for Workforce Development over at the New York Department. Oversees youth and adult workforce programs serving 120,000 plus individuals annually. Wow, that's really busy. I'm sure you can tell us a whole lot about time management and efficiencies. And it includes the nation's largest youth employment initiative for the summer youth employment programs. Julia has led initiatives like Ladders for Leaders, Work, Learn and Grow, Advance and Earn, SYEP Pride, and a financial empowerment effort that boosted youth banking by 900%. Julia also manages CRED, you'll have to tell us what that means, under Mayor Adams' blueprint to end gun violence, and has worked on the WIOA-funded workforce programs and Unity Works, which is the first program of its kind to support LGBTQ plus youth. Julia also holds a BA in History and Politics from the New York University. Julia, great to have you here. It's a pleasure to introduce you. Over to you. And I'll get your slides up as we're waiting too.
Thank you so much, Caleb. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you all virtually. I was about to say good morning, realizing that it's only morning for me. So you will forgive me. I'm still having my morning coffee. So much for time management on my end. So we like to brag here about our summer youth employment program because it is, in fact, America's largest and oldest program of its kind. And if you are blown away by the number of youth that we serve annually, you are not alone. I like to go on a bragging show when I travel nationally and speak to other cities across the United States. New York's program is by far the largest. I think any city that ever came close was Chicago, and they were less than half of the number of young people we serve. We didn't get there in a day. When I started this work under Mayor Bloomberg, what feels like many, many years ago, we were in the high 20s. And so growing this program really meant understanding the needs of our young people, the needs of our communities, the needs of our businesses, because this does not exist as a solo venture. It really involves partnerships of all of these groups. And Caleb, we can go to the next slide and I'll get into some more details. Thank you. Actually, no. Yes, that one. Thank you. So as I said, we are the nation's largest and oldest program. The program was started as an initiative under the President Lyndon Johnson. For those of you that are American history buffs, he took over from President Kennedy. And he had a vision for what was called a Great Society. And one of the many anti-poverty programs launched was a summer youth employment initiative. It was a federal initiative, and it clearly looks very different now. It has not received any federal funding in over 25 years, but the idea very much remains the same. And the idea is a very simple idea, and as much as we innovate and as much as we have cool partnerships and young people doing engineering at Google or SYEP Pride, as Caleb introduced me with, the idea still remains the same. The foundation is that you get kids busy in the summer, in the time that they are doing kind of nothing with their time and getting into trouble. So get them off the streets, get them into interesting experiences, get them busy, get them thinking, get them creating, and they will not do the things that we are trying to get them to avoid doing. And that idea, a very simple one, continues to really fuel everything that we do. And I'll get into the details of some of our programming, but it's always fascinated me that as much as we think we're innovating and have looked so different than it did in the past, it still very much holds true. So as I mentioned, over 100,000 New York City young people worked in the program. They are aged 14 to 24, which is a large number, and they are served very differently. Last summer, we received over 180,000 applications from young people. So not everybody who applies to the program is unfortunately selected to work because our capacity is at about 100,000. Our application is open right now if anybody wants to, put in a dummy application and see what New York City's program application looks like. And we have about 2 weeks to go, about 2.5 weeks to go, and we're already at 160,000 applications. So we're also taking bets for if we'll break our own record this year. How do we recruit? There is a general online application that is accessible to anybody with a computer, and the program is open to anybody who lives in the 5 boroughs of New York City. In order to qualify, you have to be between those ages of 14 and 24. You have to be legally allowed to work in the United States and be a resident of the 5 boroughs of New York City. So very simple to apply for young people. But we also understand that we need to do some targeting recruitment, especially for groups of young people that are considered vulnerable. So we have partnerships. The program is broken out into different parts, different initiatives that are specially designed for every young person's needs. We like to say that we meet young people where they are. And so we do about 20,000 of our young people are recruited from select public schools. I know that's flipped in the UK. Public means private, but these are regular New York City schools, and they have been selected as schools with the largest number of young people who are considered low income, English language learners, new immigrants, and large unemployment in the areas. So these are schools that are where we consider young people to be at risk, and those young people do not have to apply to our general lottery. They are selected, recruited, recommended by their school. Another large part of our recruitment, about 11,000 young people, are what used to be called vulnerable youth. We came up with a different name now because young people did not like to be called vulnerable for obvious reasons. But those young people are recruited from certain public housing developments, support agencies such as child welfare agencies, Department of Homeless Services, so young people who are living in shelters and temporary housing, and young people who are involved in the Justice Department, with the Justice Department. So in any way, whether they have been arrested, are in preventative programs for any kind of violence, referred by a judge, a probation officer, by the police department. But for everyone else, there is an online application with a randomized lottery. So if you are not part of these special groups, any kid, regardless of who they are in New York City, can apply to the program. And it's really, it's a great kind of equalizer because you do have kids from all kinds of walks of life. Now, how do we do this? It's not me, running a program for 100,000 young people. I have a team, but it is a relatively small team for the kind of work that we do. What we do is we partner with over 60 community-based organizations across the 5 boroughs. And New York City is a wonderful mosaic of different ethnic groups, nationalities, interests, borough allegiances. And so those community-based organizations are really rooted in those neighborhoods. They know the needs of their young people. They understand their small businesses. And so they are the ones who recruit the young people. They are the ones who develop partnerships with different employers, and they are the ones who operate the program. Now, I mentioned we have some specialized programming. In addition to the options that I just mentioned, we also have 2 programs that are they're relatively small together. They're under 1,000 young people, but they are especially developed for young people that are experiencing the highest risk or involvement in some sort of community violence. One program is called the Anti-Gun Violence Prevention Program, and the next one is called Cure Violence. And Cure Violence is actually a nationwide initiative. It's if you look up that name, there's a formula, and the formula is really working with communities, with some older adults who have possibly lived that life and have now left and can really be credible messengers to young people. So they are recruiting all throughout the year. They're offering experiences to young people who would like to leave a life of either gang involvement or gang adjacent life or any kind of violence that they have perpetrated or been a victim of. And in the summer, we're able to offer them an experience that is appropriate for them, because some young people cannot leave their developments, cannot leave their neighborhoods. There are certain places where they cannot be and certain places where they're more comfortable. And so these experiences are very small for a reason, and they're designed exactly around the needs of those young people. And our goal is to sort of graduate them. So anti-gun violence program is probably for our most vulnerable, most at-risk young people who may still be in gang life, but trying to find other alternatives. After that, we'd like to see them move on to the Cure Violence model, which is much more of our mainstream, closer to our mainstream programming. And after that, we've seen young people say, you know what, this was a fantastic experience. What else can I do? And so in the fall, they're going to take a college course and maybe receive a credit and then see themselves moving along the kind of rungs of the program. I think we can go to the next slide. I've exhausted this one. So I'll walk you a little bit through the sort of weeds of how the program is operated. As I mentioned, our application is open now, and because most of you are not in the US, I'll tell you a secret. We're going to extend our application for 2 weeks. We don't say that because we get the largest number of applications coming in right before the deadline, because that's how everybody's mind works. But we typically keep the application open for a week and a half. And as I mentioned, we receive a massive amount of applications. The specialized options that I mentioned, we continue to recruit as long as there's space. So, we understand that the needs of a young person who may be in temporary housing is very different. And so they may need additional time. So as long as there's space in those options, we continue to recruit young people. But for everyone else, the program application will close. And after that, we start running our lotteries. We enroll young people, and that involves checking all of their documents, because this is an employment program and the city of New York is an employer of record and has to issue bank accounts. The program structure is a little different for someone who's 14, 15 versus 16 to 24. Our 14 and 15-year-olds, they do not technically work. They are involved in project-based learning, which is a service learning project where they can come up with a topic of importance to them and work on that throughout the summer, while also getting their work readiness skills so that they are able to work with an outside employer when they do turn 16. Our 16 to 24-year-olds are very typical experience. They go through an orientation. We actually have an online curriculum that young people have to complete of at least 10 hours. That includes everything from writing your resume to workplace communication to financial literacy and time management. And when they are deemed ready, they are connected to employers, to work sites. Last year, we had over 16,000 employers participating in the program, and they range from small businesses to hospitals to government agencies to really cool private enterprises as well. And we can go to the next slide. So these are sort of some of our highlights. As I mentioned, we work with a lot of really great companies. Not everybody gets to work at Disney, but a lot of folks got to at least visit some Disney spaces and Disney theaters. It also allows us to, in addition to the actual employment experiences, we provide a lot of supplementary experiences to our young people. So Caleb, in my intro, you mentioned SYP Pride. It's an initiative we launched a few years ago for young people who identify with the LGBTQ community. And we were able to get a lot of really fantastic experiences. We had Playbill, for example, set up a stage during the month of June right in Times Square, and our participants who wanted were able to come up there and, along with real Broadway stars, perform acts. And they got to visit some amazing LGBTQ landmarks in New York City, like Stonewall Inn, and hear from historians. And that's just one experience. We also visit a lot of employers that are not able to offer experiences to actual jobs to young people. And the idea of the program is really, now that we've got you doing something productive for the summer, let's show you just how wide the world is. So our pre-employment curriculum is actually called Hats and Ladders, because we all wear many hats and we climb many ladders to get to where we are. And so it's all about career exploration and showing young people just how much they can do. Before we opened up the conference, we were joking about me wanting to come to London and someone wanting to come to New York. But the truth is, a lot of our young people who may be growing up in Brooklyn or the Bronx have never been to Midtown Manhattan. They've never been to some of these companies that are participating in the program. We have a lifeguarding and swimming initiative this summer, continuing from the last 2 years, because we realize that our young people don't know how to swim, even though we're surrounded by beaches everywhere in New York City. So that's something that we are able, with the size of this program, to now offer. And financial literacy is another thing that I would love to highlight that we do. When I started this initiative about 12 years ago, our young people were being banked in the single digits. We're now our young people are being banked at over 70%. They are paid either with a Visa payroll card or to a bank account of their choice. And so over 70% have actually opened up their own bank accounts and banked their summer earnings, which is an amazing stat, because all the research shows that young people who start saving early and start making good financial decisions early tend to have really fantastic outcomes down the line. And I will hand it over to my colleagues later on, who will talk about the impact of the program and violence. But I can say that when this mayoral administration took over, that was one of the #1 things that they wanted to know about. They wanted to know about the research that showed that there's a decrease in youth violence and harm to youth, because young people are both the victims and the perpetrators of violence, unfortunately, especially in the summer months. And that was the reason that our program was expanded from 70,000 to 100,000. And it's I think worldwide, post-pandemic, there's been a lot of kind of bad publicity on what is happening to young people. Young people have been through a lot. But I truly believe that if the program had not grown and if we had not had already started moving in the direction of specializing the program to serve our most vulnerable youth in the ways that we were starting to serve them, I think the outcomes in New York City would be much more dire than they turned out to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. A great way to kick it off. And man, what a volume of a program. And I've got questions, and hopefully we might be able to think about that in the Q&A. I'll stop sharing and then come back in with for Judd. But thank you so much, Julia. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. And now we'll listen to the impact and evidence element of what Julia has mentioned. And we're going to invite Judd to come and speak on behalf. And Judd, you have to excuse me if there's another way to say your name. Please do let me know so I can.
No,
say
you got it. You got it right.
I got it. Okay, okay, I got it. I got it. I love it with the American accent. Always sounds better, isn't it? Excellent. So Judd, over to you. You've got about 7 minutes just to lay down the foundation of what Julia spoke about in that regard. I don't have
No, I don't need slides.
Great.
I'll just
I was panicking.
I'll give you
great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks for having me. So I'm a professor at the Wharton School, the business school at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been here about 15 years, and probably the first project I ever started here as a professor was working with Julia and the Department of Youth and Community Development on an evaluation of the New York City Summer Youth Employment Program. And it was of interest to us as academics before we knew about the amazing impacts it would have on youth and reducing youth violence and victimization. It just was a massive social program. I'm from New York. I actually still live there. I commute down to Philly. And I remembered the Summer Youth Employment Program from when I was of that age range, and people that I knew were applying and thinking about participating. And so, it was of interest to me and the academic community. What is the impact of this very large program? It was not as big as it is now. As Julia pointed out, it's grown. I'm pleased to hear, in part thanks to some of our research on it. But the very first project that we did was essentially leveraging the constant oversubscription of the program. That, even as big as it is even more popular. There are more people who want to participate than there are slots available. And so we leveraged that lottery, the random allocation of slots to people who had wanted to participate. And so we could compare the lottery winners and losers. And this is, for those who have either consumed or been exposed to research designs, this is the gold standard, often called a randomized control trial, because the groups of participant or the groups of youth, some of whom are able to participate and some of whom can't, are basically identical except for the luck of the draw in the lottery. And so our very first work was just exploring. We looked back at the folks who participated from 2005 to 2008, comparing them to the unlucky lottery losers to see, okay, what was the effect of the program in those 4 years? And we were looking at it from the perspective of a decade later, 2014, I guess. So we could see a bunch of outcomes over time. And so the kind of, we're economists. The first thing we looked at was, did the program increase earnings? And you might think, yes, of course it would, because these kids have jobs. And indeed, it was the case that youth who participated earned about $900 more in that summer, meaning these are kids, as you might have hypothesized, these are kids, many of whom are not going to be able to find employment on their own. If it's not for the program, then they are not working in the summer. And so that was kind of the first evidence of, yes, this program is not just substituting for other jobs that they might get. This is generating a bunch more employment of young people, which is what we want. We found an interesting thing looking a little bit beyond that, which was that earnings kind of dipped a little bit for those youth for the years that followed. They earned a little bit less than folks who had not gotten in to the program. And so that was something that we wanted to explore, and I'll tell you about the findings on that later. But I'm here mostly to talk about the effects on crime that the program has. And through the first research study and a subsequent one where we followed up specifically looking at arrests and convictions, we found major benefits of the program for program youth in terms of criminal justice contact. So looking at those same 4 years, we saw youth were 17% less likely to be arrested in the summer of the program. And so since people, if they get arrested, usually it's only one time in that period, it kind of the same, the percentages I'm telling you also translate to kind of, if you were interested in what fraction of arrests are reduced, it's about the same percentage, around 17%. This was mostly driven by reductions in felony arrests, and it was mostly concentrated among youth that had been arrested in the past. So when Julia talked about kind of vulnerable youth, some subset of that vulnerable youth are folks who have had criminal justice contact. And it was for those folks that we saw really big reductions in the likelihood of being arrested. So on the order of 23 to 24%. We saw that the arrests that were being prevented by the program were the kinds of arrests that were likely to lead to conviction. So the conviction rate actually reduced even more than the arrest rate. So 31% overall, 52% for the folks who had been arrested previously. So basically a 50% reduction in the likelihood that these youth are arrested for something they end up being convicted for. We have another researcher here who, Alicia, who's looked at Boston. We in New York, we're looking at one program. It's the largest in the country and very impressive in that regard. But we are also in this country of many other cities that have similar programs. And one of the things that we were kind of reassured by is that the findings that we saw in New York look very similar in other cities where it has been studied. So I'll let Alicia talk about Boston, but work by Sarah Heller in Chicago also found reductions in crime, in not just during the summer, but after the summer. And when we looked after the summer, we saw similar directional effects where there was a reduction in crime. We also saw that this trickled down to, or trickled up to the kind of most severe outcomes for youth. In the 2005 to 2008 range, the youth who were in the program were 10% less likely to end up incarcerated in New York State prison, which is kind of the, for the most severe felonies that end up into convictions, right? It's a rather intense punishment, and that was being reduced. And probably the biggest and most important finding that we found from those same summers was, and this is only because we have the vast amount of data that we have from a program as big as New York, and we could look over 4 years, but we actually found that the program was keeping youth alive. When we looked from 2014 back at folks who had been lotteried in or not gotten into the program, we saw that getting a job through the program led to an 18% reduction in mortality, meaning that the program was saving about 20 lives a year just by giving youth access to these jobs. And when I looked, this was probably the most depressing on many levels work that I've ever done in my research career, looking at death records in one of the city agencies. We saw that it was reductions in homicides and other deaths by external causes that was driving the reduction in mortality. And so that kind of all fits together in this set of results that the youth are getting access to jobs that they would not get on their own. They're less likely to be arrested. They're less likely to be convicted, less likely to end up in state prison, and more likely to be alive, suggesting that the jobs and the network that they're getting through the program is putting them on a safer path. If I have one more minute, I'll tell you about the, kind of that point I flagged earlier. Again, we are interested in the crime and particularly the mortality benefits are kind of first order. But we're also interested in the labor market outcomes of the youth. Right, the program provides jobs that keep people safe, but they also are developing the skills to work in the labor market. And so we were interested by that very first finding I mentioned, that youth were earning a little bit less in the years after the program. We were kind of interested in why that was. And our hypothesis was that the youth were returning back to the types of jobs that they had in the summer, which are great if all you want to do is work in the summer. If you want to be a camp counselor or work at a daycare center that has needs in the summer, that's great. And that's a job that you will get some exposure to and then get to return to. But if you wanted to work, say over the school year, or you wanted to work at an office or a retail setting, maybe the program on its own was not kind of giving you direct access to those types of jobs if you hadn't had one. And so what we did in subsequent work, and this was in the 2016, 2017 program summers, is that we partnered with the YCD and built a letter of recommendation engine, allowing the supervisors, Julia mentioned 16,000 employers. So we had some subset of those employers take a survey about a youth that worked for them. And depending on random assignment, the youth were either eligible to get a letter of recommendation that was kind of built off of the survey answers of the supervisors. I'm sure right now ChatGPT could do a much better letter of recommendation than we did. Ours was, I don't know if you have Mad Libs in the UK, but kind of, fill in the blank kind of letters. And we ended up sending the letters to the folks who had gotten positive enough responses from the employers and were randomly selected. And we found that folks who got that letter to kind of supplement the actual work that they had done in the program also got this letter validating that they had these skills. They were 4.5% more likely to be employed in the year after the program, not just in the summer. They switched industries to industries that were a little bit higher earning. They earned over the 4 years after the program summer about $1,350 more, about a 5% increase over the group that was not eligible for the letters. And we did some work to make sure that it was due to the letters. And sure enough, the youth who get letters from us are substantially more likely, about 250% more likely to include a letter in a job application when they're applying. We invited some of them to apply for a job working for me and kind of use that as a way to explore use of the letter. So in addition to all of the benefits on crime, there's also ways to turn these programs into drivers of labor market prospects, although it might require some additional tweaks, and letters of recommendation seem to be one of them. So I probably exhausted my time. I'll cede the floor.
Thank you very much. Superb, Judd. And Judd is the Howard Marks Professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, has BA in economics from Harvard, master's in, I think it's philosophies and economics, if I've got it right, at the University of Cambridge, and a PhD in business economics from Harvard University in 2011. And now I see why podcasters sometimes introduce their guests after, because they didn't introduce them in the first place. So Judd, wonderful to have you, and I hope you're having comedy gold here at the same time with us Brits. Well, it's my pleasure to next introduce you to Dr. Alicia Modestino. Alicia is going to talk to us about the Boston model. Is a professor at the Northeastern University with joint appointments in public policy and economics, and is also the research director at Dukakis Center for the Urban and Regional Policy, where Alicia is leading research on the labor market dynamics, skills match, and youth employment. There isn't a better hat to have talk about this from a Boston perspective. Alicia, over to you. You have the full 9 minutes remaining, and then we'll see what we do about Q&A, but please don't feel reserved on that. I will share your slides now, and definitely a welcome. Over to you.
Fantastic. And I'll try to be as brief as possible, since I know the Q&A is important. For folks who don't know the US context, There's a large sports rivalry between Boston and New York, and I'll say a healthy, friendly, maybe summer jobs rivalry as well. And the one bragging point that I think Boston can bring to the table right now, we are not the largest program, we are not the oldest program, but we are the only program right now that has a Mayor's Youth Jobs Guarantee as of last year. So every Boston Public School student who wants a summer job can have one. I'll just say this work is joint with the Office of Youth Employment and Opportunity in Boston, who has been my research partner for the last 10 years and funded by the William T. Grant Foundation. Next slide. So, I just wanted to draw the link between how does a summer job program reduce violence among youth? It might seem very obvious to most people here, but when I present this work, people are amazed that a 6-week job experience can have these kinds of impacts. We kind of touched a little bit on this, but obviously limiting time and opportunity to engage in delinquent behavior. That's certainly how the Boston program started, as mostly keeping kids off the streets and out of trouble. But they quickly realized that this program can do a lot more than that. And so really focusing on changing behaviors that's correlated with delinquency and crime. And so that's where you get some of these targeted violence interventions, even though just developing good work habits and soft skills is helpful in that regard. And making crime less attractive, right, by improving future opportunities. So seeing a pathway beyond joining a gang or other kinds of criminal activity, and whether it's, embarking on a career path or, potentially graduating high school and going on to college. And then finally, we can't discount the direct income support that the program provides to youth and families. It's actually a huge cash transfer where our young people are earning, about $2,000 a summer. And most of our young people, at least half of them, are paying some kind of household bill. So they're helping their parents pay rent, put food on the table, pay utilities, and all of that contributes to positive outcomes for young people. Next slide. So a little background on the Boston program, has been around since the early 1980s, so not as old as the New York City program, employs upwards of 7,000 to 10,000 young people. Boston's a smaller city than New York, so we don't have as many young people to serve, so maybe that helps us get to a Mayor's Youth Jobs Guarantee, and works with about 500 to 900 local employers every summer. Mayor Michelle Wu is the one who issued the Mayor's Youth Jobs Guarantee last year. You can see pictures of her on the side at the press release. And the Boston program has very specific goals. The two goals, obviously, to increase youth labor market attachment. It is a workforce development program, but the Boston program is also really focused on reducing inequality of opportunity across different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. For as long as we're able to still say that in the United States, given everything that is going on with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But my Boston partners are sticking to their guns, so to speak, on that for as long as they can. Next slide. The program serves all 23 neighborhoods in Boston, has greater representation among low-income communities of color in Boston, which are Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. And the way the program works is somewhat similar to New York, but I'll highlight a couple of differences. All of our youth age 14 to 24 can have the opportunity to have an actual job experience. So the 14 and 15-year-olds can be placed in positions with employers. They are paid the Massachusetts minimum wage. Older youth are typically in youth leader positions. They're age 19 to 24, and they are paid slightly more. So right now, the Massachusetts minimum wage is $15 an hour, and the older youth age 19 to 24 are now, I believe, paid $19 an hour. Participants can be placed in a job with anything from a local community-based organization to a nonprofit or a private sector employer. And they get 20 additional hours of training. Usually this is a career-based curriculum, so not targeted specifically on violence, but developing a whole holistic range of skills, everything from job readiness to soft skills to like knowing your rights on the job. Next slide. One thing that's really different from New York and Boston is that Boston really operates as an ecosystem. So I not only partner with the city of Boston, which runs the Success Link Summer Youth Employment Program, but I also partner with the other 4 intermediary organizations that braid together all sorts of philanthropic, city, state, federal funding to be able to run this program. So each one of these organizations serves a different youth population. So ABCD, that first one there, typically serves low-income youth. They actually collect data from youth and verify that they are low income. The Boston Private Industry Council is really our workforce investment board in Boston that places most of the youth in the private sector jobs. So they have very strong relationships with private sector employers, and they operate in the Boston Public Schools, and they do that brokering relationship between young people in the private sector. So not everything in the Boston program is randomly assigned, because you don't randomly send a 14-year-old to, say, Genzyme or one of the hospitals or the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston and think that that's going to work out entirely well, right? So the Boston Private Industry Council works with young people all year long. They start with a career exploration in the fall. They assess the young people. They help them develop a resume. They help them interview with at least 3 employers. And then they determine if they're job ready. If they're not job ready, then they work with one of our community-based organizations, say as a camp counselor or some other entry-level job. And then they get passed on in future summers to a private sector internship. Youth Employment and Opportunity is the one that I mentioned at the top. That is the city's kind of open access job. It's not targeted towards anyone in particular and has a wide variety of jobs. MLK Scholars is a program run by John Hancock. And that is a private sector employer stepping up and funding and placing 500 to 600 youth every summer. So we take help wherever we can get it with our summer jobs program. YOU, Youth Options Unlimited, is a community-based quasi-government agency that works with court-involved youth exclusively. And so a lot of times these intermediaries are passing young people between themselves. So if ABCD gets a court-involved youth, or Boston Private Industry Council is working with a court-involved youth, they will reach out to YOU to help place that young person. YOU also works very closely with the Boston Police Department, and the BPD will recommend young people to YOU for placement, particularly gang-involved youth that they think can be helped and to exit the gang. And then the Office of Workforce Development also runs through the City of Boston a Learn and Earn program that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Next slide. So I've been evaluating the Summer Youth Employment Program in Boston since 2015. So when I say I've worked really closely with the city for 10 years, these are like my family at this point. And before the pandemic, most of the jobs were assigned by lottery, except for those PIC jobs, the private sector jobs that I was talking about. And so that let us be able to do the kinds of research that Judd just described with a treatment group and a control group. One thing that's different in Boston is we also do a pre-post survey of our young people to find out what are they learning during the summer and how does that drive some of those long-term outcomes that Judd was talking about. So we survey them on their social emotional soft skills, their community engagement, their academic aspirations, their job readiness. And then we look to see how that's correlated with these longer term outcomes that Judd was talking about. So not just criminal justice outcomes, but also academic outcomes and employment and wage outcomes. Next slide. And so we've contributed to this literature along with Judd, as well as our colleague Sarah Heller in Chicago, and have found that the Summer Jobs Program improves really a range of criminal justice, academic, and employment outcomes. In terms of the criminal justice outcomes, we find a 35% reduction in violent crime and a 29% fall in property crime, and that occurs over the 18 months after the program ends. And this is correlated with improvements in soft skills. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in just a second, but that's not all that the program does. So the program also improves academic outcomes, primarily through increasing aspirations to go to college, but also work habits. So one of the most important things whenever I do focus groups with young people, I ask them, what did you learn this summer? And almost every time, the first thing they say is, you know, if you're going to be 5 minutes late, you may as well not show up at all. So they learn to show up on time because of a job in a way that school does not hold them accountable for. And those work habits translate into an increase in attendance rates in the year after participating in the program for school. That leads to higher grades and grade point averages. And pretty much it's not rocket science. If you show up and you don't fail your courses, you are going to graduate from high school. So we find a 4 percentage point increase in those high school graduation rates. We also find that having those private sector jobs through the Private Industry Council increases the likelihood of taking college admissions tests like the SAT and enrolling in college. So they're seeing a different pathway, and in particular, shifting from applying to our 2-year colleges to our 4-year institutions. And then also, as Judd highlighted, there's not just an improvement during the summer in terms of employment, but we also find a 9 percentage point increase in employment and a 30% increases in wages during the year after the program, particularly for opportunity youth of color. And it sounds like I just cherry picked that group out of this, but really in Boston, I'll just say the racial dynamics are such that it is incredibly helpful for a young man of color to have somebody from the city's summer jobs program vouch for them and be a recommender for the next job. Next slide. So this is where I just wanted to show you a little bit more of what those impacts look like in terms of the criminal justice improvements. And really, most of what I'm showing you here is breaking those outcomes out by arrest type. And for the most part, like I said, we see these improvements in violent and property crime. We don't see much of an improvement in drug crimes, possessions of gun crimes, or other things like disturbing the peace and those types of crimes. And we think, a lot of this has to do with some of the behavioral impacts of the program. So, one of the speculations is maybe it doesn't reduce drug crime because young people are actually earning more money and maybe they're spending some of that on drugs. We don't know, but it does improve kind of the most prevalent and most, I guess, things that concern the city's leadership in terms of criminal justice impacts on violent and property crimes. One other thing I'll just mention is that in the Boston program, we don't find that this necessarily turns sinners into saints, meaning that it doesn't reduce the likelihood of arrest. It reduces the number of times that young people are being arrested. So it helps those at-risk youth to reduce that kind of delinquency in crime, but it doesn't completely eliminate it. Next slide. And really what I wanted to highlight here, this is showing you that net decrease in crime over time. The shaded area is during the program in June, July, and August. And as you can see, at least in Boston, we don't find a huge decrease in crime during the program. Judd finds a bit of an impact in New York on this. And when I talk to kids, it's mostly because the program's operating during the day, like say 8 to 2 p.m., and most crimes happening at night. So there's not really this incapacitation effect that's happening. But what you see is over time, those two groups diverge, where the treatment group is decreasing, again, the number of times that they're arrested and arraigned for violent crimes. And we think that comes from those behavioral impacts, right, of seeing a career pathway, of learning different skills. Next slide. And so when we tested this with the data that we have, so remember I told you we survey the young people in terms of what they learn over the summer, what we found was the youth who had a significant reduction in criminal arraignments were the youth who reported large improvements in what I call soft skills. So large improvements in managing emotions from the beginning of summer to the end, large improvements in learning how to resolve conflict with their peers. So when I, again, do focus groups with these youth, particularly with the court-involved youth, these are jobs where they are required to work in a team. So they are figuring out who's going to take the lead on different things. And, if you don't figure it out among your team and you get into a conflict, your supervisor is going to get involved. So these are skills that they're learning on the job. And then asking for help, right? That's not always an easy thing for young people to be able to do, but realizing that, that's what adults are there to be able to do for you, is act as a mentor. And that's one thing that young people gain during the summer that we also see as an improvement from the beginning to the end of the summer, is gaining an adult mentor who is outside of the school system, outside of their parents, outside of other people in their community. Next slide. So during the summer of 2020, the Boston program pivoted in a big way. This is during the pandemic. Most of our summer camps shut down. And so we were sitting in a position where we would be losing most of these jobs. So we took all the research evidence we had generated from prior to the pandemic to the mayor at the time, Mayor Walsh, and helped them develop new summer jobs tracks to be able to keep young people occupied in meaningful activities during the summer. So one of those things that we did, you can see here, is a virtual internship track that we developed where, the thing we're doing now over Zoom was very new at the time and employers didn't know how to do it. So we built a platform, ready-made projects, and had some co-op students from Northeastern help supervise the young people over Zoom, and we're able to get young people employed that way. We also developed a Learn and Earn program. So this is where young people are being paid to take community college courses. The course is paid for and their time spent taking the course is paid for. So they don't have to choose between having some kind of post-secondary exposure and earning money during the summer. And this has been so wildly successful that Boston has expanded this and even gotten four-year institutions involved. So at Northeastern, we now bring 150 to 175 young people on campus every summer as part of our Bridge to Calculus program, and they're paid for that experience. We took these two new programs and combined them with the research evidence, brought it to Mayor Walsh. He invested an extra $4 million of relief aid that we were getting from the federal government to ensure that we were employing the same number of youth at the same rate of pay at the same number of hours, because we knew that there was a concern in terms of youth violence that summer. It was Black Lives Matter in the US. There was a lot of social unrest. As well as wanting to make sure those households were getting the support that they needed. And then Mayor Walsh became Secretary of Labor Walsh under President Joe Biden. And that's where we get the president in summer of 2021 citing the work in Boston, encouraging other cities to expand their programs using their COVID relief funding. Next slide. And then I think that I only have 2 slides left. This, you might wonder, what was the urgency in terms of making this kind of investment? So I'm showing you on the left-hand side, Boston shootings by neighborhood in 2020. You can see where the summer jobs program operates in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, Hyde Park are places where we have high rates of neighborhood shootings. And then I think if you click one more time, there we go. I left one animation in. Sorry, Caleb. Ta-da! In summer of 2021, with expanding the program, we saw a drastic reduction in shootings in the following year. And so again, the city felt like this was a huge return on investment. And indeed, coupling this reduction in terms of violent crime with the increases in high school graduation, the program basically has a return on investment of 5 to 1. So for every dollar the city's investing, there's a $5 return in terms of these social outcomes. All right, last slide. So a few key, takeaways for you. One, I think there's really clear and compelling evidence that summer jobs reduce violent crimes. It happens in Boston, it happens in Chicago, it happens in New York. And because of this, I'm now working with Arnold Ventures in the United States to scale up summer jobs programs across 20 other cities in the coming 3 to 5 years. The other thing is the timing and the impact of the data suggests that it's really a change in behavior. It's not just keeping kids busy. And then that means that there's a potential for longer term effects. And so I know Judd, in work that he's published and work that I am currently working on now, we see these longer term effects, particularly for the at-risk youth, that this reduces crime for the longer term. It's not just, something that happens for a year and then fades out. These programs also yield other benefits to youth, their families, and their communities. So not just those improvements in high school graduation and not just those improvements in terms of household finances, but frankly, in Boston, New York, Chicago, you couldn't run these summer camps that they have for low-income kids without employing youth through the summer jobs program. So this helps broader communities in that way. And then finally, operating these things at scale is tricky. So as Boston has been increasing the number of youth that it serves, finding high quality employers, making sure they have the training to supervise youth, that is no small task. And so starting small and expanding very intentionally, I think, is important. And then finally, in Boston, one of the things we're doing is really breaking down the silos between education and workforce development, because to youth, it's all development. So one of the things we're doing now that we have a Mayor's Youth Jobs Guarantee is taking young people in Boston public schools in the different tracks for career and technical education and linking them very intentionally to summer jobs. So for example, if you're a kid in the life sciences innovation pathway in a Boston public school, I'm going to make sure you get a job in a hospital this summer, or I'm going to make sure that you get a job working for one of our science labs in the summer. And that way, really enforcing that work-based learning. All right. that's my flyover. Happy to answer any questions. Hopefully we have time for one or two.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So we got just about time for one question if it comes in quickly to share. Yeah, Heather, go for it. And if we could get a 30-second answer, that would be fantastic. So, but depends on the question, right? So Heather, go for it. You'll be taken off mute, and yeah, you give us a moment. It's coming.
I run in the UK traineeships for young people who are criminally exploited and county line trafficked and help them sort of give a leg up into the jobs market. I'm really interested in the support mechanism around that pastoral support. Those sort of, so you ask your employer to take this young person on. How much have you had to allow for, if you like, upskilling the employer to be ready to receive young people who've had quite traumatic childhood experiences and who are, you know, can be still living quite chaotic lifestyles in terms of their tolerance of what can be still at times quite poor behaviour around not turning up or turning up with attitudes and things like that. How much have you had to invest in that side of it? Because that's an area that can be really resource intensive, I think. And I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts on that and the two programs that you've outlined.
I'll just say really quickly that in Boston, because we do have YOU who works with court-involved youth, that's where the ecosystem really can come together and serve young people. And so if there is someone who's experienced trauma or who has, kind of greater challenges, they will refer across one another. The other thing I'll say is they do provide training every summer to all of the summer youth employment partners in terms of supervising youth. And then in recent years, coming out of COVID, because we had detected on our survey a huge increase, a doubling in mental health issues that young people were facing in terms of depression and anxiety, they have added to those kinds of technical support that they provide for employers to be able to address those issues as well. But I'm sure Julia probably has some also very specific things they've done in New York.
Yeah, and we actually do work with a group that works specifically with victims of trafficking. But would we, in the general answer, whether it's something as severe as trafficking or in general involvement in the criminal justice system, we work with organizations that are referring these young people to our community-based organizations that are actually operating the program. And so they work in tandem throughout the summer to develop an experience for that young person. So it may be something that we call a sheltered internship in the beginning, where they're not working with an outside partner, but actually their internship will be with that organization, just so they're comfortable in their workforce development skills and some hands-on learning, and then are able to graduate to an outside employer in the following year. But throughout their entire experience, those two organizations are going to be working together. So it might be a social worker working with an employment counselor to develop an appropriate experience for that young person, because it might be trafficking. It might be, as I mentioned, somebody who's still involved in the criminal justice system and cannot be in certain spaces where it's not appropriate for them to be employed with certain kind of employers. But that's the kind of relationship that is built to support young people in these situations.
Excellent.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, super. So thank you so much, colleagues. Great to have you. It's recorded. Please come back and watch. I'm sure your information will be made available. We've got lots of research that we summarize in our toolkit strand to do with summer jobs programs. There's so much there about the length and longevity of the program, the proof of concept, the ability to influence policy leaders with some hard facts and data. I mean, there's so much here. That's why there's so much investment going into this. It's a very rare thing to see such investment in such embedded community programs on such a long time piece, and I can see why the evidence is quite strong in its advantage. So thank you, colleagues, once again. I'll turn over to our UK colleagues now, and we're going to kick off with our Tom McBride, who is the EYV Lab Director, housed within the Behavioural Insights team. Tom has been very involved with the design and setup, working alongside UK youth in terms of the Great Summer Jobs Program, as we've called it, which is a partnership between ourselves, DCMS, and Youth Futures Foundations, which kicks off in July 2024. So, Tom, over to you. We're squeezed for time. I know you're fantastic at this stuff, but I'm hoping that 5 minutes per person, and then we'll come back to Q&A, and then we'll have to do a round two. It just there's so much here. We have to do a round two. So I think I've got to load up your slides as well, if that's right. Let's see.
Cool. I might just launch in, Caleb, while you're bringing those up.
Yeah,
Afternoon,
go
everyone.
for it.
I'm Tom McBride. I'm the director of an organisation called the Ending Youth Violence Lab. We've existed for about 3 years to build the evidence on effective approaches to tackling youth violence, working very closely with YEF on a number of projects. And summer jobs is something we've started talking to YEF about 2 years ago on. It really with the kind of look at what's going on in the US, right? These are huge. I think 27 of the 30 biggest US cities have got a summer youth employment program. New York alone puts 100,000 young people a year through this, which is just staggering in terms of scale. And there's really good and consistent evidence across a number of cities, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, that this has real significant impact on violent offending. So let's think about how we could do that here, how we could try and replicate this approach and see if it works here. And I guess that's what we've done in terms of setting up the Summer Jobs program. One key difference is this program has been set up explicitly so it could be evaluated. So we're not evaluating existing delivery. We've set this up so we could test the impact. Hopefully we find it works and that it continues, but this ultimately exists so it could be evaluated. So we were very lucky to have the opportunity to speak to lots of colleagues in the US about the programs. All the colleagues on this call, plus people in Chicago who've been mentioned, and really understand how it's done in the US. And there's a few things that we wanted to make sure that we replicated here in the UK. If we just skip on, Caleb. I've definitely exhausted the point on which I can speak without my slides. Thank you very much. So we've always wanted this to be focused on, the previous slide, if you don't mind. We always wanted this to be focused on paid employment. We didn't want this to be about training or volunteering. People had to be paid for meaningful work. We wanted this to be highly targeted at young people living in highly violent areas and with factors which made they were more vulnerable to getting caught up in youth violence. We were very clear that this had to be not just a job, so it had to have the elements of pastoral support and pre-employment training that colleagues have mentioned are prominent in the US. And we always wanted this to measure offending as the outcome that we wanted to test. If we just skip on, I've stolen this slide from colleagues at UK Youth. Thanks, guys, for putting this together. They're the funders at the top, the middle row is the organisations involved. But I just use this to highlight that actually this is delivered by youth organisations embedded within their communities that we're working in. So we're working in London, Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, and this isn't UK Youth delivering this to hundreds and hundreds of young people. We're using community organisations that are embedded within their community, know the young people they serve, and that's why we really liked this model of working. We're not parachuting a service in there, we're working with communities that are already there. And this means ideally this should be quite scalable, right? If this proves to work, we can take this to other places where there's that youth work capacity. If we skip on, I won't spend ages on this. Just before Christmas 2023, we got approval to go ahead with this, appointed UK Youth. That gave us 7 months to set up and deliver a programme for the first time. It might have seemed like a bit of a luxury to start with creating this, which is theory of change, but I think this really helped build a common understanding of what the organisations were trying to achieve and why. I won't spend ages on it, but just to say, let's highlight this sort of third from the right box. Ultimately, the outcomes we're trying to shift are violent offending, number of people who are not in education, employment and training and so on. But we think the mechanisms this is most likely to work, and this is very much based on Elise's work, is things like confidence, self-esteem, aspirations and so on. So there's some of the things we think that this employment opportunities will give to young people. So if we could skip on. So this is a 3-year program. To 2024 was year 1. We were doing what we call a feasibility study in year 1, and with hopefully to establish if it could progress to later stages, just to really understand if we could deliver this to young people as we anticipated, identify teething problems and work those out for future years. So the sort of questions we're addressing in that are on the next slide, but they were very much around deliverability. Can we recruit and retain employers, young people, and so on? Acceptability, do people, stakeholders like it, value it, think that this is something that's additional, adds additional, is valuable in the area? And evaluability, can we see the pathway to a large-scale randomised control trial? Can we collect the data and so on? So if we could just skip on, I think we might be at the results. Oh, this is an ugly slide, isn't it? Apologies. The bit on the left you're not really meant to be able to read. I don't know why I keep it in there, but the key takeaways here are over 400 young people participated in last year. I think it's 440. So that's 520 people were offered a place, and 430 took that placement up. Only 5 people didn't complete a placement once they took it up. I mean, that's just unheard of in our world, you know. So this is, once you get young people into this, they really stick with it. Now they're literally being paid to turn up, so you might expect a lot of people to complete this, but really promising signs on the demand there. Next slide, please. Just talking quickly about the participants, they were highly vulnerable. You had to have one of these factors to be eligible for being involved. But 1 in 5 had a social worker. About 15% were identified as at risk of criminal exploitation. High proportions had been arrested, excluded from school, and so on. About a third of young people had more than one of these criteria as well. So there's definitely a vulnerable population. Next slide. And it was quite, so we were looking at 16 to 24-year-olds, but 4 out of 5 were under 20. So the people that signed up to this program were predominantly at the younger age of that distribution, and about just over a third, the biggest group, identified as Black. Next slide, please, Caleb. So these are what we call our pre-specified progression criteria. The cat's out of the bag, it is progressing into year 2, but these are the things we said we had to hit in year 1 to justify going into year 2. I won't dwell too much on these, but in terms of referrals, registrations onto the programme, completions, etc., we hit all of those. Lots of signs that the demand were there. If we could skip on. Oh, sorry, just go back one, thank you, mate. There we go. Cheers. Really strong feedback. This is a sort of very high level summary of all the surveys and qualitative work we did. But 95% of young people very satisfied or very satisfied. 4 out of 5 employers liked it and said they would participate again. And similar number on local delivery partners. So high good evidence that people really like this. If we go on one more. I won't spend too long on this. Lots of employers, sort of mixed reasons for taking part. I always think there's a group for whom they just liked the opportunity to offer young people this job. I should have specified up front, there's 0 cash cost to the employers for this. The wages are met, the cost of wages are met centrally. So there's a group who thought this is a great opportunity to help some vulnerable young people, and there's a group of people, particularly those who work in visitor attractions, summer play schemes, who this is just additional labour capacity. This is people they would have had to hire had this scheme not existed. But some concerns around communication and length of the programme, some things we can iron out for next year, and that's why you do these feasibility studies to try and address some of those concerns. Next, in the interest of time, I might just skip on to the final slide, Caleb, and just go for the full summary. This is definitely feasible, right? We've shown in a very short period of time we can set up a summer youth employment programme. Huge kudos to colleagues at UK Youth who made that happen. We thought as many periods where we thought we wouldn't be able to get this set up and running, but we got it there. Demand is there from employers, from young people, bit of regional variation. Some areas where it was easier to get job placements than others, and that's something that needs to be addressed in future years and will be highly acceptable, but lots of things to work on for future years. So increasing referrals from what we call external agencies, so people that youth workers haven't come into contract before with, diversifying the range of employment opportunities. A lot of the jobs are in the third sector this year, last year, and we'd like more in the private sector, I think, and increasing uptake and employment opportunities in some areas are some of the things we need to address. But I'm sure Lauren and Rachel are going to talk about that in a bit more detail. That's more than 5 minutes, sorry.
That's no problem. So we're going to have, thank you so much, Tom, and Tom's helped us put this together, and lots of work has gone a few months ago to get this all set up. So Tom, massive thanks. Next, we're going to hear from Rajab and Isa. Rajab is the founder and director at Sporting Communities CIC, and we'd love to hear from Rajab and Isa, the delivery partners. So they're going to tell us about the learning about working with employees, recruiting the right young people, tackling disproportionality in that respect. So next 7 minutes is yours, and then we should leave enough for colleagues at UK Youth to bring it home. But Rajab, over to you. Thank you. And I will share your slides. Just 2 seconds.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, excellent.
Fantastic, thank you. I won't take too much time because we've actually got a lived experience with Isa on the call today, who's one of our young people that was employed through the programme. So my name is Rajab Noor. I am the director of Sporting Your Futures. We're based in the West Midlands, and this programme we delivered across Birmingham and Sandwell. So the summer jobs programme is not something that we've done before. I'd like to say that, we've done snippets of a half term, maybe a week or 10 days of employing young people, working with the local council, the local police, the local community groups in order to tackle youth unemployability. So us as an organisation, we have been going for the last 10 years, and the vision and values of UK Youth is exactly what we've been looking for. So for us, it was a no-brainer to apply to a program like this. And I think what we want to show is what we believe in our vision, we did over this holiday. So we took on 30 young people, and the recruitment drive was not an easy one because a lot of young people came forward because we're quite ingrained within communities, but they didn't realise what the commitment would be. So the fact that we'll be working every day, 4 days a week, 5 hours a day, was a bit alarming for some because they're not used to turning up on time, as everybody's mentioned on this call, and they're not used to showing full commitment to a programme. So quite quickly we worked out who wanted to be involved and who didn't in the induction week. So we had an induction week where they went through all the information, and I think the process was an eye-opener for us because a lot of people want to get paid, a lot of young people want to get money, but they don't realise the commitment. So through that, I won't do too much more talking. If you want to flick over to the next slide, please. I've got a couple of photos I wanted to share, this being one of them. So this is a mixture of young people that came onto the programme along with some youth workers and also some mentors that worked with us. What we do, we use the power of sport to engage within communities. So those young people that opted for sport did a lot of customer service admin towards projects, but also got to deliver. So we deliver sports qualifications, youth leaders qualifications, but also got to bring that to life in a sports camp. So we've done programs previously, but I can't say that there's been many programs with much support. So if you could just flick over to the next slide, please. I don't think Rachel or Christine have seen this photo, but this is the time that we was able to work with our project managers throughout this, and also the young people got to speak to the UK youth staff. So Rachel and Christine here were able to spend time with us and guide us throughout this process. So it's quite early on the program, and alongside those are some young people that were able to come onto the program and become qualified within sports, but also made it throughout the whole program, and hopefully in the future will be working in sport. So the next slide, please. So now I'm going to introduce you to Isa, which you saw on the last photo, and this is his first week with us. Isa, over to you.
Hello.
You just-
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Too.
My name is Isa. Before I start, I'd like to talk about myself and the person I was before the camps. I mean, sorry, not the camps. The program. So before the program, let's just go to year 11 in school. I wasn't the worst student. However, the people I was around were definitely weren't the best people for me. A wrong crowd, to say the least. You know, the time of the what's it called? The period of when the summer jobs came around. If I sound nervous, I am. It's still all new to me, promise. Yeah, if there was a time all it came around, it's actually quite emotional because the period of when I found out about the UK youth, I just lost my job. I just lost my job at Costco. My brother, literally just a few weeks just prior to the program, my brother got arrested. My friend also got arrested a week after my brother got arrested. So it all kind of was a lot for me, saying it, because it's a lot to throw an 18-year-old boy in a sense when all this stuff is happening at once. When I got fired from Costco, a lot of the people around me were influencing me, saying to me, whispering in my ear, saying, "Oh, well, there's a lot of easier ways to make money. There's a lot of easier ways to make money." Saying, "Oh, there's quicker ways. There's, in all the wrong ways. And you can imagine what I'm talking about. For example, like on the street, selling stuff on the streets." Then the UK jobs program came to me. Well, I found it through research because I was always interested in sport, like coaching, football, and also mentoring. I really liked mentoring when I was like in school, but I never did it because it wasn't deemed as like, cool. So it's not deemed as what 17, 18-year-old boy should be, especially in the era I grew up in. So eventually I've always heard about Sporting Your Futures. I researched the what's it called, the website. I mean, a website. I checked the website of Sporting Your Futures, and I saw that there was a registration for this thing called the Summer Jobs Program, which I originally, I won't lie, was quite hesitant to join it because it's well out of my comfort zone. All my life, I had to play this kind of persona, not persona, but it's like having a hard shell over, because deep down I know I'm quite a confident person, but it's a persona in a sense of it's not who I actually was. So moving forward from moving forward from me being hesitant on joining, I actually did join eventually, signed up, and then when I just started from the original.
Isa, just sorry to cut you. I think you missed a bit out. If I could just fire some questions over to you. Just quick fire. How did school and college go?
Sixth form. Okay, so school. I left school. Teachers weren't the most fond of me. Some of them were, some of them weren't. One, I'd spend most of my time outside of the lesson than actually in it. But they used to like me because I was quite pleasant. You can see that. But when it comes to academically, I wasn't really the most on it. So summer after year 11, I decided to go to sixth form. Sixth form, I got kicked out because I was quite demotivated. I didn't have interest in what I was actually doing. I had no sense of direction. I got kicked out of sixth form because of lack of attendance, such and such and such. And then after sixth form, well, after I got kicked out, I waited until September 2023. Yeah, September 2023. And then I went to college, and it was the same. Like, I didn't really have any interest in, actually, I had interest in my course, which was a sport course, but I found my attention in all the wrong places. So I got kicked out of college in June 2024. Summer jobs, this all happened in July 2024. So it was just 1 month of difference, where in reality, if I never had this summer jobs program, who knows where I could be at the moment, because it wasn't really necessarily looking good.
Where are you now, and what are you currently doing in terms of your role? So Issa started an apprenticeship with us because he performed so well across the summer. So tell him a bit more about what you're doing now and what your role is.
So my role as of today, I am an apprentice with Sporting Your Futures, doing coaching and an activator course, a coaching activated course, which was a massive opportunity to me because, one, it's gave me a sense of structure, a strength of stability, and also it's made me more confident. Now,
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Issa. Thank you.
Excellent. Rajab, Issa, I really appreciate you sharing your story on the spot and being nervous. Rajab, there's so much, if you know this sort of work, you know there's lots here that he could say and lots he probably didn't say, and you probably say, Issa, you had a moment, you should have said much more. But thank you very much, both. Rajab, founder and director at Sporting Your Futures. I said something else before, so I just wanted to correct that. And thanks so much for giving up your day and time to be with us as well. Last but not least, we're going to head over to the UK team who are committed to overseeing the trial and the umbrella organisation, as you saw in Tom's slide deck, who are UK Youth. And we're going to invite to speak with us Lauren and Rachel, who will be sharing much more insight. Lauren is the head of network delivery at UK Youth, responsibility for employability programs, and Rachel is the Barbara, who's the project manager of the summer jobs program in 2024 and now employment recruitment manager for 2025. So you guys get the last 5 minutes. And let me make this plea. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat, and what we'll do is we'll send them out to the speakers, and then we'll hope the speakers have some goodwill to come back to us on that regard. Right. Over to Rachel and Lauren, and I've got to do slides.
I'm gonna kick this off and lead us through it. In the interest of both time, so we're not jumping between things, and also because Rachel's no longer the project manager for the program, she's now employer recruitment manager, which is a very intense job at this point in the program. So I just said I'll cover the slides and we'll call on you for extra information. So she's here as backup informant. And apologies in advance if people can hear stuff in the background. I have a child at home, so the TV is on. So I'm just going to whiz through things, some of which was already covered by Tom. So thank you so much for having us here. But yeah, we have seen bits of this information. So if you could click through to the next slide for me. Okay, so we were charged originally with recruiting 600 young people in 2024 to 600 placements with different employers across 3 regions of England, and we chose to work through 14 different organisations. And I'm going to use the slide that Tom used before briefly in a second, just to kind of reiterate that. But that was the kind of original target. And you'll see, obviously, that we, from Tom's feedback, we didn't hit those targets exactly. And there are all sorts of reasons around why that we could dig into, but we won't just now. If you could skip through to the next slide and just click through until the full thing's there, because I'm afraid I did animate. So you have seen this one. Tom's right, he stole it from us, but it is a particularly good one just for looking at that broad scope. And I guess I just wanted to quickly explain, because we've talked about that delivery through organisations on the ground. The way that UK Youth works with a lot of our programs is that we deliver out through a network of highly qualified, highly competent youth organisations across the UK. And in this case, we were sticking to those 3 different regions, so Greater Manchester, West Midlands and London, sort of a restricted area of London. And we chose these organisations through an expression of interest process. So we went out, called out for organisations to apply, and got this really quite high quality delivery group. If you could click through to the next one. So the programme runs, it's actually May to September, including the kind of recruitment process, but the actual delivery runs sort of across July, August, with a tiny bit of September. People from the UK will know that really inconveniently in the UK, our summer holiday periods are different dates in different areas. So it wasn't all kind of streamlined to the same 6 weeks, but it kind of spread out across that time. It was last year, it was for young people aged 16 to 25. With 6 weeks of paid participation, including that first week of preparation. So they were recruited and screened in kind of May time, had some kind of onboarding stuff with youth workers in a one-to-one sense to understand where they wanted to go, what kind of roles would be appealing, etc. Then they had that preparation week, which had 25 hours of pre-employment workshops and kind of some of the things that have been mentioned in other programs as well in the US, those kind of pre-employment pieces of work that mean that they're a bit more set up, job readiness, so they're more set up for the roles. Then 5 weeks of placement, so 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. Not all of them worked that way. There were some that had sort of different shift patterns, I guess, but fundamentally it was 25 hours a week over the 5 weeks. And across that time, they got wraparound support from youth workers, so at least 3 individual check-ins from that youth worker, just to do kind of troubleshooting, make sure they're okay, really kind of do some coaching to keep them engaged if that's needed, or just to check in and make sure that everything's going well. And then we did the final program wrap up, and celebration events were held by in each area so that they could really kind of recognise what they'd achieved over that period, which was a really nice way to kind of close things off. But the whole thing was really heavily front loaded. This is just the window of when young people are involved in the programme. It was heavily front loaded with massive employer recruitment drive, and getting delivery partners involved, doing co-design work with young people and youth workers to develop the content for both the youth worker and employer training and that preparation week. And then at the end point, after everything's sort of finished delivery wise, there is a whole kind of reflective process that we all engage in around kind of internal stakeholder reflection opportunities, program reviewing, redevelopment ahead of year 2. And given we'd been so squashed in our timelines for year 1, we started talking to employers and to delivery partners much earlier, so before the end of the year last year, to try and get the ball rolling before contracting again. Next slide, please. So I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the key challenges. I'm going to dash through these because the biggest challenge without a doubt was employer recruitment. So I'm looking at the numbers coming out of the US. I feel vaguely embarrassed, but it was incredibly hard for us to get 600 placements, or the number of placements that we ended up with. And there was a point in May last year where we really thought we're not going to be able to manage it, and it will be because there aren't enough placements. But we did manage to do it. It was a huge kind of collective effort. And the change that we're making this year to cover that is that we have Rachel in role as the employer recruitment manager, and she has a colleague working with her as well. So we've got a designated team working on it internally this time around, whereas it was kind of a collective effort across the board previously. I won't run through the rest of these because we're running out of time, but I think it's really, I'm happy to answer questions around them. I think it's really interesting if we pop through to the next slide, that we've obviously made changes based on those challenges from last year, but it's really, I think, important to flag that challenge around the RCT that we're looking towards this year. There were sort of vague conversations about it last year in recognition that we would be tackling it this year. And it is a really difficult ethical space for some youth workers to kind of navigate, and for us to think about how does this play out so that we're not effectively leaving young people out in the cold when we've already identified them as being at risk. So there have been lots of conversations both with young people about how to communicate that, how to help young people understand what the RCT is, what it looks like, and then conversations around what business as usual looks like for those young people who aren't randomised to the participation group. So there's a lot of thinking about the language that will be used, how we talk about that lottery concept, that kind of flip of a coin element in randomised controlled trials. Jump through to the next slide. Sorry, I feel like I'm really flying over the top of this information, but it feels necessary at this point. We were also asked just briefly to talk about the engagement of young people from minoritised backgrounds, and I need to flag really clearly this was not a specific target group for the programme. We were given no kind of specific targets to aim for in this, but what we do when we are looking to target certain groups within the programs that we run is that we both look at the eligibility criteria and the locations that we want to work in, but more importantly, we work through that network of youth organisations who are deeply connected on the ground, who are working in the spaces, who understand the groups that live in their areas, work in their areas, need support in their areas. So we know that they are recruiting to that kind of eligibility criteria and the groups that we need to kind of target through the work. And then I think it's probably less important for me to run through the last two slides, which are about kind of policy and influencing opportunities. Suffice to say, there are several, if you want to jump through. And to name just a couple of them, these are some of the key messages that from UK Youth's perspective we really want to communicate through the programs that we run that are employability focused, and in particular summer jobs, because of the platform that it offers. So we know that youth work is a really effective solution to the challenges that are facing young people. We're really aware of that, and we've got evidence to back it up. We know that stronger alignment between all of the different people and organisations and sectors working with young people and providing targeted support to young people from marginalised communities is incredibly important and will be the change factor. And we also know that investment in and integration of youth work, it really bolsters the efficacy of those policies that are emerging across a range of issues. It's not just that youth work is for youth work. Youth work has an impact across the board. And again, we've got really strong evidence behind those claims. And the final slide. So there are lots of policy areas that we can use what comes out of summer jobs, for example, to kind of influence. And this is just sort of noting a few of them at the moment. Again, I won't go into them because I'm way over time. So I'm just going to stop there and finish up. Sorry.
Excellent work there and very succinct. Thank you so much. So we are deep, if our friends across the waters will say, we are deep into double overtime. And if you're here, we're deep in post extra time into penalties now. And so all that's left to say is a huge thank you to every guest speaker that's come up and given us, look, there's so much here. I feel as though when the results come out for year 2, we should gather again and hear how Issa's got on with you, Rajab, and see how the program has progressed and play things back. But just a massive thank you to everybody for hanging on. And this is now the late show. This recording will be here for a lifetime, I hope. And thank you to all the guests, Judd, Julia, Alicia, Lauren, Rachel, Tom, Rajab, and Issa. Fantastic. And I know Rachel had to jump off too. I hope I haven't left anybody out. And huge thanks to you, Nina, for helping us put together. All the very best, folks, and onwards and forwards. See you later.
Hey, Lauren, do you have a quick